Um, getting shot. It's a jaunty angle you've got at.
It is. Let me see if I can
Um,
a bit better.
So we hope as well that this is going to be a bit of a good environment for us to be thinking about what our vision might be as leaders, like what's God putting on our heart for the call He's put on us to lead. Number one, why do we train leaders? Well, you've got your before it. I'm going to follow sort of the handout that you guys have got, but we're going to depart from it as well. So hopefully you've read it. I won't ask for a show of hands because that's always embarrassing. And whenever anyone asks, and I've never read it, so yeah. I have actually read this one.
I hope so.
Training leaders. Why do we do it? I suppose fundamentally because it makes a big difference, right? Like leading a church plant, and I can testify to this. It's tough. It's tough going. So we don't want to just walk into it blindly, right? We want to prepare ourselves, and there's a sense of doing the right thing by God, who's gifted us as well, and He's called us. We don't just want to respond to His call on our lives and the gifts that He's put in us by not like making the most of it, right? So it makes a really big difference. Number one. At a basic level, I guess, if you go to the next slide, like training and learning is just, it's following Jesus, right? You might have heard the thing that oh, wow.
Sorry, where are we?
You're spoiling my Lord of the Rings surprise. Outrageous. At a basic level, so you might have heard the thing that the word disciple means learner. The disciples of Jesus were fundamentally followers of Him, right? And what does that mean? Well, that means that they kind of followed what He did. They copied what He did. They tried to learn from Him what He taught and then put it into practice in their own lives. Now, sometimes they did a better job of that than others, but aren't we the same too, right? As disciples of Jesus, we can think, yeah, I'm trying to learn from Him, but sometimes I do that better than others. So I love Matthew 11, right? Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. For I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. So you've got a sense there that, like, sometimes maybe as church leaders, I've already said it's tough leading a church, and it is, but sometimes we can make a bit too much of that, perhaps, right? Like, we're no different in many ways as leaders of church plants than any Christian is, that we should be serving under the yoke of Jesus, and His yoke is easy and His burden is light. Right? Learning from Jesus is supposed to be like restorative to our souls. It's supposed to be good for us. So I think in Antioch, we want to paint a picture of leadership as responding to the call of Jesus on our lives, right? And that being the very best thing that we could do with our lives. Not some kind of onerous thing. Now, lots of us that may be sitting here, we might be feeling kind of the heaviness maybe of a call of Jesus to leadership, and like the burden that is, the responsibility. But that's not really the kind of Jesus that we meet in the Gospels, is it? Someone who wants to burden us. And so when we feel like that, perhaps we need to check ourselves and come back to Jesus again and say, hey, I'm here to learn from you fundamentally, Lord. And what I see in your word and in your life is a pattern that is going to restore my soul and not burden me. So perhaps we need to kind of remind ourselves, right, that this is an adventure and a joy to participate with Jesus in leading His church and His mission. That Timothy verse, 2 Timothy 1:6, I remind you to fan into flame the gift of God. So you've got the picture there of like, God has put stuff in us, right? Whatever those gifts might be, whatever those particular callings might be to a place or a task. And our job is, like, we have a responsibility to not just go, all right, thanks very much for that, God. but to fan it into flame, to do the work of fanning into flame our gifts, of working on them, of honing them, of becoming more like Him as we exercise those gifts. You can now reveal Aragorn.
Oh, thank you.
Anyone not watched Lord of the Rings or read Lord of the Rings? This is Aragorn from Lord of the Rings. So he's like the king, right, in Lord of the Rings. But at the beginning of the story, he's like a very reluctant leader. And I identify quite a lot with him. My hair is not quite of his glamorous levels, but because like quite often I feel quite reluctant to step into what God might have for me, and sometimes it's like there's a fear, maybe a fear of failure, a fear of like people not responding well to my leadership. You know, he was born to be the king, and he's worried because loads of the kings before him made a bad job of it, right? And he thinks, well, that's just going to be me, so it's better for me not to try. And so maybe there's some of that in our kind of hearts right now as we think about this like quite big responsibility and big dream of planting churches. Maybe we think, whew, I don't know whether I'm up for that, Lord. That sounds kind of scary. And one way that you can read Lord of the Rings is his journey to go from reluctance to step into who he was made to be, to the end. You know, the last book is the Return of the King. Is him being who he's supposed to be. But I mean, a kind of side point, if we go on to the Hobbits, is that the other interesting thing about it is actually in the end, Aragorn's job as the king is not. He's to provide a platform for the real heroes of the story, who are the hobbits, who are these little guys, who are the ones who actually save the day, who actually win the battle in the end. So that's an interest. I think that's quite an Antioch vision, right? That those of us who are called to places of leadership, to be planting new churches, to be pioneering and going out into new places, and to calling God's people to follow, actually our call is to provide a platform for those who might not get that otherwise. If we, you know, to go into places where people are rejected, where people are used to being not noticed, where there are lots of unlikely heroes, you know, like the little people that the hobbits are, where there are people who are forgotten. You know, as Antioch, we're called to these forgotten places and these kind of people, and as leaders, our job is to give them a platform and to lift them up and to see what God might do if they're released to be to lead in the kingdom. It's quite exciting, isn't it? I get quite excited. So there you go. You know, we might ask ourselves, like, what could happen if someone who's been, you know, living on estates for 40 years, who's had a history of unemployment, addiction, family breakdown, whatever it might be, what could happen if they come to faith? What could happen if they begin to step into leadership in an Antioch church? Exciting questions to be asking, isn't it? That's why we're going to be planting churches, right? So we can maybe see that lived out. In John's notes, he points out that, like, yes, God is very good and very powerful, but that doesn't mean that we should neglect to make the most of our gifts, as we've just been saying. In fact, like it's almost kind of disobedience, right? Isn't it? If we're aware of a call that God's put on our lives, if we're aware of the ways that He's gifted on us in different ways, and we don't act on it, that's kind of disobedience, and we probably don't want to be going there, right? So therefore, like, we can say that training leaders and submitting ourselves to training is part of our worship as Christians. Yeah. So it's going to have a sort of technical, practical dimension to it, but it's very much also should have a spiritual dimension to it. That we're submitting ourselves to Jesus and His Spirit's work in our hearts. So that you see that in the way that Reap is formed, right? So that we have equip and we have animate. So this bit now that I'm doing is sort of more kind of theory heavy potentially, and but the animate section is about like speaking to our hearts and saying, okay, we've heard this kind of theory, but like, how can we animate our hearts to actually act on it? He had that great phrase in the notes about leaders should be fat. So that's faithful, available, and teachable. Faithful, available, and teachable. And I suppose in those kind of simple things, you think, well, yeah, anyone could do that, couldn't they? Do you know what I mean? Like, we're not talking faithful, available, teachable. They're quite simple things because they're character things, right? And so there's another sign right there that God's often more about calling those of character than He is about calling those who might think a lot of themselves and their abilities. So training, not just a technical kind of project, but also a spiritual exercise. Just a note on who we're training. Are we training? We've mentioned that this is specifically for. In our mind, we're thinking about main plant leaders, but it does have relevance for anyone who might be on a church plant team. Just the way Antioch is kind of organised, we tend to concentrate most of our training on those who lead the churches, and then it's the responsibility of the leaders of those churches to be doing the same with their teams and their churches. Does that kind of make sense? Not that's not to say that people, leaders in Antioch, John, Ben, myself, whatever, like kind of not available for anyone. Like hopefully we want to be around to support lots of people and stuff. But yeah, that's kind of the way that things are. I love what he said about some people we might say definitely aren't leaders. Some people definitely are, and some people could be. One key feature of a leader is going to be working on our weaknesses, isn't it? Like, I mean, I have so many weaknesses in leadership. It's painful, right? As I kind of go about my daily life and think, oh, there's another one, Lord. One of my things is like as I'm working, like if any of you have you any done Myers-Briggs? Yeah. Okay, so I am an EFNP, which apparently makes me like the most distractible person ever. So I'll be like working on some kind of email or document or something, trying to give Pete a response within like 3 months or something like that, and then I'll look out the window and I'll be like, oh, it's a magpie, or oh, that's interesting. Next door's doing some work on their garden. I wonder how many magpies there are in that average garden in the world. Do you know what I mean? And then I have to get on Google, and then I've forgotten what I was doing, and Pete has to wait 4 months for his report. So that's just one example. Other thing, like one thing that I've really, a slightly more kind of serious thing is I've been really trying to act on recently, that my kind of last minuteness in my personality is fine for me, but that the more leadership you take on, the more it impacts on other people, right? And particularly my wife quite often. So just for the sake of like peace at home and the health of our marriage, I've been trying to learn to make sure that church stuff doesn't just get landed on her because I'm just a shambles. Those are just a couple of examples of my weaknesses. There's loads of others. I have a fear of failure. Sometimes that means that I don't like try stuff because I'm concerned that it won't work out how I'd like it to. Hopefully you guys have an awareness of your weaknesses too. Like, that's a really important thing in leadership, and we don't want to kind of kid ourselves, right? And actually this is kind of separate to this session, but it's in our weaknesses that he's strong, right? that's when we're going to see the kingdom come in significant ways, when we submit ourselves to him in all our weaknesses. So as we lead, we've got to learn to work on our weaknesses, but also to get people around us who will compensate for those weaknesses. A bit now on like what we train leaders in. So this is kind of training and learning styles and stuff. So 4 main ways in the notes that we train leaders in Antioch. Walking with. So in every church in the Antioch network, we should be on the lookout for those whom the Lord's calling to be leading. So we have a couple in our church who they joined our team with the specific idea that they'd be with us for a couple of years, and then they would go out and plant from us in a couple of years' time. And the in-between time is about us kind of getting alongside them and discipling them in what it means to lead a church, what it means to plant a church. So that's the nuts and bolts, right, of training leaders. Like without that, like you can have all the courses and all the stuff that you like, but really the real kind of heart change and life change and equipping of people is going to happen in one-to-one stuff in churches as people are raised up to do the same elsewhere, right? So if you feel like, maybe the Lord's calling me to plant a church, but I'm not in a context at the moment where I can learn that, maybe the Lord's calling you to find that context, right? Where you can learn from someone else. Doesn't have to be in Antioch, by the way. Just that's a general principle, I think. Then teaching, like the REAP course. If you want some recommendations on podcasts or whatever, there's some great websites out there. CCH, Christchurch Manchester, they've got a great website with a lot of church planting teaching on it. Books are great as well. I've brought a couple, but I can't move. Could you pass me my bag? So thanks. Yeah, thanks. So one I'm reading at the moment, just an example, is this. It's quite a meaty one. Church Planting in the Secular West, Learning from the European Experience. I thought I'd just read you a little quote. It's just an example of the stuff you can learn. Books are great. So he says, planting churches in secular Europe is like laying out a garden in hard soil and an arid climate. Basically, it can be done in 2 ways. The first option is to keep adding tons of water and fertilizer. In this way, you can, grow like a park in the desert. The possibilities are virtually limitless, he says. You could even create a tropical forest in the Arctic as long as you spend huge amounts of money to arrange the right conditions. The result, of course, is highly artificial, even if it looks spectacular. As soon as you quit, your beautiful garden would wither and die. Many new churches in Europe are like those gardens. And then he goes on to say, there is another way, however. It's far more difficult and far less spectacular. Planting a garden where the climate is bad or where the soil has been exhausted by generations of farmers takes a lot of skill and effort. Above all, you must know the situation, you must have knowledge about the climate and the history of cultivation, you must have expertise and persistence, you might want to do research to find out whether there are ancient natural irrigation systems, and of course you must know everything about the local vegetation because you want to grow something that belongs here, not something that may look wonderful but can only flourish because you keep it under intensive care. Eventually you may have a garden that is sustainable. I love that. Like straight away I was hooked. And so books are a great way to, and of course like you might have noticed that hopefully that second model is the kind of planting that we want to be doing in Antioch. Coaching and mentoring. So we aim for leaders in the Antioch network to have a mentor, a coach who you can speak to, and accountability is crucial. You know about accountability. I just was going to do a quick thing. Have we got a pen for this? Amazing. Did you just yeah,
He
just
just
new.
used the legends, the whole
That's outstanding, isn't it? Wow, blown my mind.
99% of them don't work though.
Okay, right.
No
So,
problem.
have you heard the thing about low control and high accountability? Oh, well, there we go. Low control and high accountability. So that's the kind of way that we in Antioch aim to do kind of supervision and accountability. So the idea that leaders are not kind of controlled, like micromanaged in what they're doing, but they do have, there's a high accountability there. They're going to, like, all of us should be, you know, saying, well, I've done this, and being supported, and we can't just kind of, you know, get away with doing whatever. So here we have, how should we do this? So high, yeah, see what you mean. High accountability and low control. Here would be low control, low accountability and low control. Here would be high accountability, high control, and what am I doing here?
Low and low.
Low. No. Low accountability and high control. There we go. Right. So this, so here we call this, this is like a rosy situation. This is like a kind of burnout situation, crazy. This is kind of like just a sloth kind of situation, so this is lazy. So lazy, crazy, rosy, and I suppose we could call this dozy. Is that how you spell dozy? I don't know. But yeah, so this is kind of the sort of healthy way we want to operate, where people are getting the license to be doing what God's calling them to do, the freedom to lead in the way that they should be, but they're having the support and the kind of the proper rigor is going into, like, they're not just being like left to do whatever. And we all know that's not because there's a lack of trust in the network. That's just because as humans we need accountability. Like, you just have to look around at the church in the world, don't you, and see some of the kind of misuse of leadership that goes on to realize that we need accountability. So accountability is good, but if we have high accountability and high control, then we're just like, we're setting ourselves for burnout, like here, because yeah, people aren't made. Leaders should have the chance to kind of the freedom to do things in the way that God's calling them to, without being micromanaged. This isn't good, obviously. Just kind of, but it can. This can happen. Maybe not like because of, like intentionally, but we can just sort of. Maybe we're planted into a place, and we've just not quite got the structures around us that to support us and to challenge us, and depending on personalities, you know, like my personality can sometimes veer to like laziness, not because but out of a kind of fear of like failure. Do you know what I mean? So that we can end up there because of that, if we don't have the proper kind of checks and balances in. And this one, I can't remember what I was going to say about this one, but it ain't good. Yeah. And time is cracking on. We can maybe dig in the break if you've got any questions, then we can talk about that more. Does that make a bit of sense? Yeah. Yeah. Then there's also, you know, importance of, as leaders, taking responsibility for our own training, whether that's, you know, I love going to the New Wine Leaders Conference every year. Really good kind of time of fellowship and teaching and stuff. And being with other people and doing similar things of like mind. And there's loads of church planting training out there and stuff that we can point people in the direction of. Right, time is cracking on. Vision. You might have seen that prayer from 24/7 prayer. The vision is Jesus, dangerously, obsessively, undeniably Jesus. So before anything else, vision for church planting is Jesus, right? Vision as followers of him, it's all about him. But there's also a sense that as a leader, we need to have a vision that people can so they can understand what on earth we're talking about when we're talking about planting a church. So it's a kind of crucial part of any leadership. In Antioch, we have this phrase of kind of half cooking the vision. So there's some things that are just non-negotiable, and they're in the notes. But we're small church. We grow by planting new churches. We're aiming at areas of deprivation. We're trying to be not like ordained led, but ordained oversight, and trying to raise up lay leaders and local leaders and all that kind of stuff. There's all the kind of bullet points are later on in your notes, I think. It's not good enough just for us to understand our vision when we're leading, but the people have to as well. If you can't communicate the vision, then there's a problem. So like vision, it's a way of sharing leadership, right? A way of people being able to buy into what you're doing. There's another book I brought. This is good. Primal Leadership. So it's all about emotional intelligence in leadership. And in this, he talks about two forms of leadership. Resonant leadership, so like when something resonates, or dissonant leadership, where it's kind of there's a sort of it doesn't chime with the people. And there is a time where a dissonant form of leadership is necessary, like in a crisis situation, right? You need a more kind of army style leadership of sort of like command and control or pace setting. But the point that they make in this book is that the long-term model of leadership has to be something that resonates with people, that gives them space to be themselves. And one of the prime forms of resonant leadership is visionary, where people can see where they might fit into a vision. So that couple that I was talking about earlier, one of the key things that I suppose drew them into the Antioch network and into our church, Grace Church Brooklands, was because they could see that their vision of what God was calling them to could fit into our vision. Like our vision wasn't like a kind of like, we need some people to do these jobs for us so that we can achieve the thing that we want to do, so we can make massive empire and feel good about ourselves. Sometimes, that maybe that's how the flesh in us like reverts to that, but hopefully that's not how we're operating most of the time. Hopefully we're saying to people, look, like God has this big vision for Grace Church Brooklands to share the grace of God with people in Brooklands, and then with the rest of Wythenshawe beyond. And so within that, they could see, okay, yeah, we have a passion for that place too. We want to see people come to know Jesus, and we feel him stirring us to leadership. So we could kind of get involved in that. Do you see the difference between like we need people to fulfill roles and do jobs for us, to like inspiring people in a kind of vision sort of way? What was I going to say? Yeah, and just one thing before we just have a bit of discussion. Vision makes it like people need to know whether this is something that they want to be part of or not, right? It's only fair. And like if we sell them like lies and they like find out later, they're just going to be annoyed and cause problems at best. And also for us, like it's important when we're casting a vision to people that they because otherwise people might get involved and not be the right kind of people involved. The other day, Sarah and I drove past some people that we know in our community who about 18 months ago were considering whether to join our church and be part of the team. And at the time we were feeling quite like desperate for people, you know, and we're like, oh, maybe Lord, you're calling them and it could be right and stuff. And in the end, they decided not to join us. And we drove past them and we're like, really glad that they didn't join our church, because we know them a bit better now, and we know a little bit more about like what would work and what wouldn't, right? And it would have just been a disaster, an absolute car crash if they were part of that. Not because, you know, the Lord doesn't love them, of course he does, but they just wouldn't have been right for what God was doing and is doing. So it's right that I'm glad that they were obedient to listening to God and where he was calling them, and glad that we were able to communicate clearly enough about what we were doing that they realised that wasn't what they should be part of at this time. So it's important, I think, to remember to kind of hold your nerve with the vision stuff, because these kind of churches that we're talking about planting are like, it's kind of radical stuff, right? Not everyone will be up for it, but if we kind of lower the bar, if you like, or lower the vision and the expectation to just be like, oh well, kind of whatever is good, we just need people like, then I think we're going to lose something. So we owe it to, as well as to God, we owe it to ourselves and to them to be clear. Why don't we have a little bit of discussion, because I've been jabbering on for a bit. Okay.